Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Life with Loverly podcast. We have our first guest of the season on today, and I could not be more excited about this conversation. You guys really loved the episode last season with my nutritionist, Bridget Titgemeyer, so I knew I had to bring on another expert in the health and nutrition field. Today, I am sitting down with Doctor of Pharmacy and Cardiovascular Research Scientist, Dr. James DiNicolantonio. You have probably seen some of his content go viral on Instagram over the years because he has accumulated almost 3 million followers on the platform, and he is a wealth of knowledge. Today, we'll be tackling some of the health issues we all seem to be experiencing, while also getting into the nitty-gritty on specific ways to improve our overall health. Dr. James has written 9 best-selling books, has authored or co-authored around 300 publications, and has been a guest on major TV outlets like The Dr. Oz Show and The Doctors. But here's the thing, I know making healthy lifestyle changes is hard. So I want this conversation to serve as a resource with takeaways you can implement today, but also as something for you to come back to when you're ready to take your health to the next level. Health information can feel overwhelming, so make the change in a way that is doable for you. My why behind my health is to be my best self for my family and loved ones, and I know this community prioritizes this just as much as I do. My hope is that this conversation helps you do just that. Here's my conversation with Dr. James DiNicolantonio. Hi, Dr. James. Welcome to today's episode of the Life with Loverly podcast. I am honored and having a little fangirl moment that you are on the podcast with us today.
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So I first discovered you via Instagram a few years ago, and I feel like your content has just been on fire since then. And I know we have some mutual friends, Rachel and Chris Moore down in Florida. I think we just missed you when we were there last week.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to connect sometime for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So we've got lots of questions. So we're going to hop right into it today. Did you always know that you wanted to go into health and medicine as a child?
No, actually, I wanted to be a lawyer.
Okay.
My parents were kind of steered me into the direction of pharmacy because my mom, she was a pharmacist, and her dad and her grandfather, so they kind of steered me into that direction. I've always been into like being fit, I guess you could say. I wrestled and did cross country in high school and did some other competitive sports like judo and kempo and stuff like that. But no, I didn't always want to be in, let's say, medicine per se.
Yeah. And I know in the intro I mentioned like some of what you do, but do you mind just sharing really quick what your role is now and kind of like your history into getting where you are now?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I graduated from the University of Buffalo as a doctor of pharmacy. And then I became a cardiovascular research scientist at St. Luke's Mid-America Heart Institute, as well as an associate editor of British Medical Journal's Open Heart, which is the largest open access cardiology journal in the UK. So a lot of my research has been focused on cardiology, lipids, inflammation, things related to the heart. And during that time, I published, over 300 papers, mostly on nutrition. I actually started out publishing on medications at first, and then I realized I couldn't really help my patients as much as I wanted to, just focusing on medicine. So then I switched over to nutrition and exercise.
I love that. Let's start with some symptoms that I think a lot of people experience, especially after eating: bloating and fatigue. If someone is experiencing this, where can they start on their journey to uncover or evaluate what's really going on?
So I guess it depends on how much someone is eating and if they're eating a lot of fiber. So if you're eating a large volume of food, or you're eating a large amount of fiber, let's say 10 grams or more, it's actually natural to bloat after that type of a meal. But if you're bloating after a small meal, then that's not normal. And there's several things that could be going on. One would be potentially vitamin B1, which is called thiamine deficiency. And the reason being is that B1 actually controls basically the brain connection to the stomach through the vagus nerve. And that's That's basically how the stomach knows to produce acid and to start digesting food. So when you're B1 deficient, that connection between the brain through the vagus nerve and secreting stomach acid doesn't work very well. So that can lead to bloating, that can lead to constipation, and a lot of gastrointestinal issues. Actually, B1 deficiency can cause something called POTS, where when you stand up from a seated to a standing position, where you feel dizzy and faint. So that is a very common cause, and a lot of people have this, but they don't realize they do. And so just taking a simple vitamin B1 supplement, anywhere from 10 to some people need a few hundred milligrams per day, can really help that.
And so would you just recommend like somebody doing blood work to figure out that deficiency, or is it okay to just start taking that supplement just to see if that helps?
So no, the thing is like in medicine, none of the tests are 100% accurate. And so you can be deficient, let's say, in a certain organ, in the brain, in the heart, in the gastrointestinal tract, in the central nervous system, but you won't see it on, let's say, a blood test. So nothing is perfect. You can, if you want to kind of like maybe try to confirm what's going on. But it's almost sometimes better empirically to take things that have a large therapeutic index, like a B vitamin, which is water soluble, very, very low risk of any type of issues, taking B1, especially at the doses I just cited, and seeing empirically if after supplementing, all these symptoms start improving. That's actually better to me than trying to take a test and see whether you're on some type of normal range, you're falling within it or not.
Yeah. And I feel like that's very easy advice that any of our listeners could just immediately try if they were experiencing some of these things.
Yeah. And I mean, I've had patients that have gotten benefits taking B1. Some actually had to do a full spectrum B complex because sometimes they're also deficient in B6 as well, which also has to do with digestive tract as well. So sometimes it's better to just cover your whole bases and take a good multivitamin/mineral, cover everything. And then sometimes people have to go high on the B1, especially to get that gastrointestinal system working properly again.
Okay. Another staple in people's day, of course, is coffee. How can you tell if coffee is something we should consume or not? And are you a coffee drinker yourself?
So I used to be a very avid coffee drinker until I had to stop. So that's why I was just about to say it's very highly individualized.
Yeah.
I've consumed anywhere from 6 to 9 cups of coffee for a decade or more. So it definitely improved my performance. It allowed me to write 9 books. Like without coffee, I wouldn't just be like able to do that.
Right.
So it's really, I've had to figure out different things to kind of replace coffee, which luckily I have been able to do. But I started getting a lot of reflux after such a high amount of coffee intake for such a long period of time that I really had to come off of it. Otherwise, my acid reflux was just really bad. So I would say that coffee as a substance for antioxidants, it is the largest source of antioxidants for the average American. And it's not inherently bad per se. And it's highly individualized. Some people are fast metabolizers of caffeine and they can tolerate fairly high doses. And then some people are slow metabolizers, and even having 1 cup of coffee, they're super jittery. They can't fall asleep, and they could have things like acid reflux and stuff like that. So what we need to understand about coffee is, I would say once you start hitting the 3 to 4 cups, the risk of electrolyte loss, the increased risk of diuresis and dehydration from water loss starts to really increase. So for every 4 cups of coffee you consume, we lose about a half a teaspoon of salt extra out in the urine. And you're going to lose about 16 extra ounces of water if you consume those 4 cups within 2 to 3 hours, let's say. So it can be dehydrating if you're someone that already consumes a low amount of water to begin with. And now all of a sudden you're pushing out another 16 ounces of water that you typically wouldn't have if you start consuming 4 cups of coffee per day. And coffee will also deplete potassium as well by about 500 milligrams to 600 milligrams for every 4 cups you consume.
Wow. It's so interesting to hear this because I'm a huge coffee drinker myself. I just love the taste of it, but I'm not a huge, I need to get better on my water intake. So some of these things are really inspiring me to reevaluate the liquids in my life.
Well, luckily there's a simple fix, because if you simply hydrate with salt, electrolytes, and water at least 30 minutes prior to coffee, that's going to have several benefits. Number one, when you wake up, you're already in a dehydrated state. You've lost about 500 milligrams of sodium overnight. You've lost water overnight in the urine.
Mm-hmm.
And so getting that back first is going to actually help your mood, your focus, your energy throughout the rest of the day. So just getting in a good 12 to 16 ounces of electrolyte water with good amounts of salt will help. And doing it prior to coffee is important because coffee actually decreases the absorption of sodium and water by anywhere from 15 to 20%. And most people know after they have their cup of coffee, they typically have to run to the bathroom. And so that inherently tells you you're losing a lot of salt and fluids when you consume the coffee. And that's kind of how it causes a reduced absorption of sodium and fluids.
Okay. And do you have a electrolyte or salt that you suggest adding to your water?
Yeah, I use Relight.
Okay.
It's got salt in it. It's got potassium. It's got magnesium. I take up to 3 scoops a day, but I just do 1 scoop in the morning with 12 ounces of water. And then depending on my sweat losses throughout the day, I might have another 2 or 3 scoops.
Okay. Relight is actually one of my favorites. The mango flavor is
Yeah.
delicious in my opinion. If you're looking, as our listeners, if you're looking for a new electrolyte, that is a great option. Okay, so past coffee, let's get into a question for my sweet tooth lovers. I know they would really love to decrease the sugar cravings. Can you tell us some ways to curb those cravings and specifically your research on salt? I know we kind of were just talking about salt, but how it relates to like having a sweet tooth.
Yeah, so some good things that help with sugar cravings are anything that's sour. So grapefruit, lemon, lime, and especially then if you add salt to that, is going to help kick a sugar craving.
Okay.
Now, when it comes to actually trying to reduce those sugar cravings, making sure you're getting enough salt is important because if you think about it intuitively, like because salt is an essential mineral, there had to be a way for mammals to understand that they're deficient. And once they found it, to start consuming more of it. And so, in fact, there is something in the brain called the dopamine reward center in the brain. And so, if any mammal, including humans, are deficient and not getting enough salt, then the dopamine reward center in the brain gets activated. It's basically saying, like, once I find the substance, I want to get a hyper reward from it because that's telling the mammal to continue to consume it and that they're deficient in it. So unfortunately, sugar can hijack this hyper activated reward center in the brain. So that's why when you're on a low salt intake or you're not getting enough salt, sugar is that much more rewarding because of that system.
Is it similar to when you're like, you might be hungry, you feel this like hunger, but then you really just need to drink water, or maybe you're dehydrated, like how sometimes those can connect?
Exactly. So there can be like this sort of connection of, are you really craving sugar or are you actually craving salt? And that's why
Right.
sometimes just taking some salt on the tongue with a little bit of water can kind of curb that sugar craving pretty quickly.
Okay. Okay, let's talk about working out really quickly. I saw on your Instagram that you stated we lose 1% of our muscle mass every year after the age of 30. What can we do to combat that?
Yeah. So we also lose collagen too at around the same rate, just under 1%. But actually, we lose collagen starting at the age of 20.
Wow.
A lot of people throw that stat out there, but and it was driving me crazy. So I actually found the research paper back from I don't know 1970 or something. I can't remember the date, but they actually measured basically the collagen in the skin of women and men over from the course of 20 years old to 80 years old. And it was slightly less than 1% every year after the age of 20. And then we also, like you said, we lose skeletal muscle too, around 1% after the age of 30 every year. So obviously it's pretty simple when it comes to preserving muscle mass. You want to basically exercise each body group at least twice a week. That's ideal. So that would be, I like to do push-pull exercises on the same day. So I like to do biceps and triceps, and then I like to do chest and back. And then you integrate things like your neck, your shoulders, your core, glutes, and legs as well. And you try to hit each muscle group twice a week. And you want to basically try to do 3 to 4 different exercises for each muscle group. You want to do around 3 sets of somewhere between 6 and 12 reps, where the last 1 to 3 reps are difficult. You don't have to go to failure. And I think actually going to failure every set is actually detrimental. It's going to actually increase your fatigue. It's going to increase the time it takes you to recover. And most people actually injure themselves when they're trying to push with bad form that last rep. So I think actually going close to failure for most of your sets is actually better than trying to go to failure every single time.
Okay. That's interesting. It makes me feel good for my current workout routine because I do that 2 times a week. What about cardio? How often should we be doing cardio?
You want to try to get around 150 minutes of cardio, 180 minutes of cardio per week.
Okay.
So a lot of people ask me all the time, is walking cardio? And it depends. If you're walking uphill at a fast pace, then yes, that can be considered cardio. But just basically going on a leisurely stroll, like walking pretty slowly and not walking uphill, that's really not considered cardio. But obviously jogging, 30 minutes a day, 3 to 5 times a week, that would be considered cardio, or just playing sports.
Yeah.
As we get older, I think it's more fun to just like play sports to get your cardio, whether it's tennis or pickleball or basketball or whatever. That's kind of how I get a lot of my cardio. I do jog 3 to 4 times a week, but I also play basketball 3 to 4 times a week too.
Okay. That's great. Okay, 3 things I see a lot of information about on social media with conflicting information are magnesium, collagen, and seed oils. Let's talk about each of these. So, with magnesium, I feel like it's mostly connected to aid in sleep at night. Can you tell us more about magnesium and the sleep connections? And then, what are some symptoms of magnesium deficiency?
Yes. So magnesium is required in the brain to actually form melatonin, which is
Okay.
obviously the hormone that we start releasing once the sun goes down to help us fall asleep. So that's partially why magnesium can help us sleep, is because it improves the synthesis of melatonin. So it helps our natural system to fall asleep to do that.
Okay.
Also has a calming effect. It acts sort of like, basically it has this inhibitory effect on the brain as well. So it has a nice calming effect too. So it's not necessarily, some people actually do feel a little tired on magnesium. I have the opposite effect. I actually have a ton of energy when I take magnesium. So I take my magnesium during the day. It helps me sleep at night. Some people have to take it at night, however, because they feel too calm and too relaxed. But that's kind of a good thing if you're using it for sleep at night. Now,
Right.
the signs and symptoms of magnesium deficiency are fairly clear. Muscle spasms and muscle cramps. Now, that's not to say every muscle spasm and every muscle cramp is due to magnesium. If it's due to, actually, the most common cause, if it's from exercise and sweating, would be salt loss. But secondarily, magnesium deficiency does cause muscle cramps and muscle spasms. Really bad menstrual cramps, typically due to magnesium deficiency. Photosensitivity, headaches, and migraines, very common to cause from magnesium deficiency. And then things that you wouldn't necessarily like feel or see would be things like coronary artery calcification, because magnesium is nature's natural calcium channel blocker. It prevents the calcification of our arteries. So you can't know if your arteries are calcifying, but you can take basically what's called a CAC score to see. It also increases the risk for heart failure, high blood pressure if you're deficient in magnesium. So magnesium plays a role in actually 800 enzymatic functions. So it's a cofactor to allow many enzymes to work in the body. And so that's why it can present in so many different ways.
Wow. It's so just fascinating. I feel like so many people don't even know a lot of this stuff, or they just haven't been taught this, or this isn't common knowledge. So I feel like this is really interesting. Um, okay, moving on to collagen. We hear all types of things about collagen. What do we really need to know about it? And does it actually like really help your hair and your skin?
Right. Well, so the common thing is people will say, well, your body's just going to break down collagen into amino acids. So why don't, like, you don't have to take collagen. That's what a lot of people will argue. That's a fair point. There's a few problems with that. Number one, we don't break down all the collagen into amino acids. We actually absorb a lot of the peptides intact. Number two, radio tracer studies in animals have proven that actually those absorbed collagen peptides can actually get to the target of action. So that's another thing a lot of people say, well, just because you ingest collagen, how do you know it's going to get to the site of action? Well, we've done radio tracer studies in animals to prove that, yes, it can get into the cartilage, it can get into the skin and actually start regrowing and improving those sites and areas. The third factor would be we have meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials in humans, basically where they aggregate all the studies and look at hair, skin, nails, bone health, blood pressure, etc., showing benefits. So from clinical studies in humans to radio tracer studies in animals, we know that collagen does work. And as we just talked about prior, we do lose collagen every year after the age of 20 at just under 1%.
Do you have a suggestion on a brand for magnesium and for collagen that you would recommend if somebody wanted to go out and buy either or both of these?
So I take Vital Nutrients Magnesium. It's a combination of magnesium, glycinate, and malate. I have a full script account, which is basically my doctor. It's like houses all my professional supplements, so that gives a discount there. And then for collagen, I use Ancient Nutrition Collagen. It's a multi collagen, and it also contains eggshell membrane and vitamin C. So we do need to ingest collagen, not just for the peptides, but also it contains an amino acid called glycine, which we really don't get that in the diet. So that's another benefit of why actually it is beneficial to ingest collagen. It gives you that amino acid that makes up 1 out of every 3 amino acids in collagen called glycine. And you don't get glycine through the diet very well unless you take collagen. And the vitamin C is important because it stimulates messenger RNA to actually synthesize collagen in our body.
It's great. Okay, so seed oils. I feel like this has been an interesting topic. Like my family has personally just kind of been trying to get rid of, but they kind of feel like the newest thing to be taken out of restaurants for cooking. So what is so bad about seed oil, and what should we be avoiding when cooking at home?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think so. There's 2 camps. One camp thinks that seed oils are fine and may even be healthy because they lower cholesterol. And there's another camp, which I fall into, that believes that seed oils, industrial refined seed oils, when you cook with them, are harmful. So that's not to say that cold pressed on a salad is harmful. I don't think it's the best, but it's definitely better than industrial hexane extracted and then high heat cooking with seed oils. So there is a difference. So I think it's important to kind of mention that. But I'm not guessing, right? Like Chris Ramsden from the NIH, who's like one of the smartest people I know, he's done 2 meta-analyses in human clinical studies. So the reason why there's these 2 camps is because prior to his meta-analyses, they grouped the omega-3 studies and the omega-6 studies, combined them, and said there's no harm. Chris Ramsden, what he did was he said, nope, I'm going to remove every study that had omega-3s in it, and I'm just going to look at the omega-6 studies. And when he did that, he found that compared to saturated fat and trans fat, that seed oils significantly increased all-cause mortality and increased death from heart disease. So that's why there's such, I think, conflicting data and why there's 2 camps, because one camp will say, well, the studies don't show inflammation and the studies don't show harms. But then there's the other camp that looked at Ramsden's meta-analyses from the NIH, and he's done 2 of those, and it did show harm. So I think that's primarily what's going on. But the other thing is that there's many human studies looking at the susceptibility of our LDL, our bad cholesterol, to oxidize when you ingest seed oils, and it significantly increases. So that there's another kind of mechanistic harm in humans. So I just want to make it clear that like there is definitely evidence in humans that consuming omega-6 seed oils can be harmful.
Yeah. And is there like a type, like if we're cooking at home, what should we avoid? What should we use instead if we're trying to eliminate seed oils?
Right, that's a good question. So omega-6 seed oils are things like corn oil, safflower, sunflower, canola, grapeseed, things like that. Rice bran oil, and even peanut oil too. So you kind of want to avoid cooking with those oils. Oils that are more stable under cooking would be things like ghee, things like, actually, a lot of people don't realize this, extra virgin olive oil is actually a fairly stable oil to cook with, especially because of the polyphenols. It's so high in antioxidants that even though it doesn't have the highest smoke point, it's still fairly high smoke point, but the polyphenols prevent the oil from oxidizing rapidly. And so actually looking at the cooking studies has shown that extra virgin olive oil is a fairly good oil to cook with as well. But then your animal fats, like your tallow and your ghee, are also good oils and fats to cook with.
Okay.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on avocado oil?
If you can find like a true avocado oil that's not like actually filled with seed oils, then that's
Hmm.
a decent oil to cook with, because it's
Okay.
mostly monounsaturated, just like olive oil, except extra virgin has the advantage over avocado oil because it has way more polyphenols preventing the oil from oxidizing.
Okay. And it's interesting because when my family, when we kind of started trying to eliminate seed oils, I did not realize how many seed oils are in so many products that you wouldn't even think have oil in them.
Mhm.
I mean, just going through my kitchen pantry, I was like, and this has seed oils, and this has, and it was crazy. Like, I made a, like, here's what doesn't, here's what does. And I was just blown away by how many things we consume on a daily basis have seed oil in them.
Yeah, like I don't I try not to even look at it anymore. I mean, because I know what has it in and what doesn't, but
Yeah.
it's so frustrating. I'm like, why are they even putting it
Yeah.
in bread? Like, or why are they doing
Right.
this? This is like, I feel like, or ice cream. I'm like, why are you putting seed oils in ice cream? Shouldn't ice cream just be dairy? Like, what is going on here? Um,
Right.
so I agree. It's super frustrating, and it's also why there's been studies that have looked at the omega-6 content in our fat stores over the last 50 years, and it's basically tripled how much omega-6 we store in our fat compared to, let's say, 50 years ago.
It's just wild. I mean, not to be like a conspiracy theorist, but it also just kind of makes me think like, why, what is really going on here, you know?
Well, the basically what ended up happening is during, I think it was like, was it? I think it was like World War I, where like we had to use like a lot of butter and we had to use a lot of these animal fats, and it was becoming very scarce. And so, and even prior to this, Procter and Gamble, they created the cottonseed oil as a replacement for butter. Um, and so it was really that it was out of not just necessity, but it was cheaper. It wasn't as expensive to make, and but it wasn't for health reasons. So
Yeah. It's very interesting. It definitely makes you think about what you're putting in your body when you really start to think about it.
yeah.
Okay, next question. Cholesterol also seems to be a hot topic in America. I would love to know a few things. One, what blood levels are you looking for in regards to cholesterol? And then two, how cholesterol and insulin resistance are connected.
So most doctors want to see like total cholesterol less than 200. They want to see LDL less than 100. And someone who's had a heart attack, they want to see it less than 70. But there's really never been a single study actually showing that like elevated cholesterol outside of like factors like familial hypercholesterolemia, which is really high cholesterol levels. That if your triglycerides are good, if your insulin levels are good, that's solely having a high LDL, let's say 130, or a high total cholesterol of like 250, is bad per se. Because your total cholesterol might be high because your HDL, your good cholesterol, is high. So you have to look at that too. And also, what matters more is like, is your bad LDL particles really small because of insulin resistance, or are they large and buoyant? That will tell you a little bit too if you're insulin resistant or not. And so you had asked, I think, like, how does insulin resistance contribute? Insulin resistance is what increases VLDL and triglycerides and can even increase LDL too. So if you have high blood lipids, it could be due to the fact that you're actually insulin resistant because you're over consuming refined carbohydrates and sugars.
Gosh, I feel like that we could even go so much further into all of that. One thing I've recently like seen, just I know like some people are starting to use like glucose monitors to like monitor the way that like their glucose
Mm-hmm.
is within the body. And I know there's like certain foods, if you're eating a meal, you should eat certain things first
Mm-hmm.
to not like make your certain levels like skyrocket.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any recommendations around kind of like if you're just eating a meal, some things you should eat first or in a certain order to help that?
Yeah, protein and fiber will reduce the the blood glucose spike from foods. So if people want to consume more vegetables and more protein first and have their starches and sugars later, that will help. So that's why it's actually kind of good that dessert comes after dinner because of that. But you also have things, right, like apple cider vinegar can reduce the blood glucose spike. And, there are some studies showing a little bit of red wine can do that as well, which is maybe why the Europeans don't have as much diabetes as we do, is because they consume a little bit of red wine with their meal potentially. And then there's, basically the protein is more satiating long term. So when you get the protein in, that's going to keep you satiated long term, whereas fiber kind of makes you satiated quickly, so you don't overeat too much in one sitting.
So it'd probably be more ideal to like eat your protein or a salad or greens. And then if you had like bread with your meal, or that was like offered at the table, eating that after you have been eating your greens and your protein.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. So speaking of food, for the parents out there who are on the go, do you have any easy meal suggestions that we can make on a weeknight while running, our kids around that are good for our families, like children as well? That would just be like a good, healthy meal.
Yeah. Crock pot works great. Just grilling works great, or stovetop. So basically, I can grill a steak in like 12 minutes. It doesn't take very long. I can grill burgers in like 15 minutes. Crock pot takes longer, but you just set it and forget it for 4 hours, so to speak. So you can just throw in, whatever meat you like, shred it up a little bit, and put in whatever ingredients you want and make that. Or you can just grill on the stovetop. Basically, ground beef, peppers, onions, eggs, etc. Like basically, I try to get in meat, eggs, dairy. I consume some grass-fed yogurt and fruit. That's like mostly what my diet consists of. And then I'll have I do time my sugar. Like if I want like a little bit of freshly squeezed orange juice, I'll consume that after I consume protein and fat. That way it doesn't spike the glucose. But orange juice, especially freshly squeezed, can help prevent a lot of the oxidative stress that occurs when you eat certain foods.
Okay. Interesting. In your latest book, The Obesity Fix: How to Beat Food Cravings, Lose Weight, and Gain Energy, you state research that says today's children's may be the first generation of Americans whose life expectancy may be shorter from their parents. What would you say are the things that you are currently educating your children on to prove this stat wrong, and how can we set our kids up for success?
Basically, it comes down to the parents and what they're buying and bringing into the house, right? Like if I buy ice cream, we're all going to eat it until it's gone, right? So like it's kind of not having it in the house. And then really the second thing that maybe even is just as important as the first, not bringing it in, is finding healthy alternatives to that, because you're still going to get that craving, right? At night, you're going to get that sugar craving. So what can you have to offset that? So I'll have like some grass-fed yogurt with a little bit of maple syrup and cinnamon, and that's kind of like my healthy ice cream. And you can put protein in it and collagen, and you can put it in the freezer for 4 hours, and then there's your healthy ice cream. So like finding these like healthy alternatives to some of the more bad desserts, I guess you could say, is just like a simple swap that can help a lot of people out.
It's interesting because I feel like so many people give up the excuse of like, oh, I don't have time to do that, or just they're looking for like the convenience, or where our society is just so like busy and on the go, and it does take a lot of effort and research to eat healthy. But when you put it this way, like this is literally to save our kids' lives, it feels like why wouldn't we want to do that?
Yeah, and that's the thing, is like it's kind of overwhelming for the average person, right? Like they like what is healthy, what is not. Everything's conflicting. And even myself, I've went on almost every single diet to try to understand like what truly does work. I went almost not vegetarian, but I went very very high fiber, low meat, and I lost a ton of muscle. I went from like 160, 165 down to 147, most of that being muscle loss. So I've tried a gamut of things, and I think I sit somewhere between like mostly animal foods with a well selected like fruits and certain vegetables that I tolerate, and a little bit of starch, like a little bit of like organic potatoes and a little bit of fruit juice, like timed correctly. Because I think that carbs do help with energy, with mental health, with fertility, with hormone health. Somewhere around 100 to 200 grams for the average person of healthy carbs is probably good, especially if you're an active person. If you're someone that's not very active, okay, great. Maybe the ketogenic diet will work. But for someone who's pretty active, you're going to want at least 100 grams of carbs if you're going to want to feel good.
Yeah. Okay. Would you say, like, if you were giving somebody advice on getting 10 items that you just constantly have in your fridge or in your pantry to like, as a great starting point to kind of make a switch to eating healthier, what would be 10 food items you would recommend?
Beef, so like ground beef,
Mhm.
steak, chicken, turkey, eggs, and some type of dairy if you tolerate that, freshly squeezed orange juice, and then I would say fruits of your choice, berries. Avocado is a fruit, but let's call that number 9. And then number 10, vegetable of choice.
Yeah. Okay, let's go into some like rapid fire questions that I asked my followers. Um, if you could only take one supplement, what would it be?
Oh man, that's tough. Probably magnesium, to be fair, just because
Okay.
it's so depleted in our diet now. Um, we've lost about 35% of the magnesium in our vegetables and about 25% from animal foods. So even though you're eating healthy, it's fairly difficult to get magnesium. So if I had to choose just one, which I hate those questions, then yes, it would be probably magnesium.
Okay. What are your thoughts on eating organic foods? Is it like an absolute must do? Are there some foods that you don't eat organic if you are super pro organic?
So look up the Dirty Dozen. That'll tell you the ones
Hmm.
to try to eat organic. Organic does have less pesticides. So several meta-analyses have published that there are less pesticide residue in organic produce versus not. But there's also less heavy metals too. So the nutritional value may or may not, depending on how it's grown, will may or may not be better. Many times it actually will be better though. But from
Hmm.
a toxicity of pesticides and heavy metals, it will be less, at least based on the clinical studies.
And I think like one thing to note too is like just because it says organic on whatever the food type is doesn't necessarily mean it's like healthy.
Right. True. Yeah.
So I think that's also a common misconception. So many people are like, "Oh, well, it's organic." And it's like, "Okay, but it's still with seed oils and it still has all these things that aren't good for you or are not, you
Yeah.
know."
And almost like with any type of label, right? Gluten free, like you can eat gluten free Oreos that are vegan, and it's like
Right.
that's not healthy. So yeah, but we get caught up in these labels of low salt and low sugar and gluten free, and just because it has those labels on it, normally it's actually probably not healthy.
Right.
Really, one of the best things you can do is look at the number of ingredients. If there's typically more than 4 ingredients, you want to really pay close attention to that product.
Yeah. Um what are your thoughts on athletic greens and is it enough to not have to use other supplements if you consume them?
To my knowledge, I don't think there's ever been a clinical study in humans looking at athletic greens.
Okay.
So I don't think there's evidence for it. I can't say for sure, but regardless, I don't think it's worth the price. I think it's like $3
Yeah.
a day for it. I would rather source just a good multivitamin mineral that's probably like 50 cents or less a day than trying to take a mixture of greens, and whether it has an appropriate dose that has a clinically effectiveness or not, I really don't know. So I really can't speak
Yeah.
to it, but my gut tells me too expensive and no evidence for benefit.
Yeah. It's kind of like one of those things you see so many people doing it and then it's like, "Oh, well, I must need to take it." But if you really do some research and realize that like your multivitamin or a few other things like you said could be more cost effective and get you the same like nutrients or, what the supplements are providing, why wouldn't you do that instead?
Right.
Okay. Another question from our followers is what is your top tip to combat anxiety or depression?
Oh man. Well, I guess it would be to figure out the cause of it, right? So, like, if you're in a bad relationship and that's causing your anxiety and depression, well, then working on your relationship, right, and things like that. In regards to like, if someone needs to take something, there are certain supplements that may help, like inositol does have anti-anxiety effects. Magnesium has been shown to be as effective as certain antidepressants in clinical studies. So there are supplements. I'm not a huge fan of the medications when it comes to mood and things like that. For panic, that's a little different. Like taking like a Xanax if you have to. I can. That's a little more understandable. Like, and feels
Hmm.
a little just. It just seems a little bit more legit than having to go on some of the other medications. But then some people do really benefit from them. So I don't want to like shame anyone for having to take a medication. Like if it works for you, great. Um,
Right.
so
And like you were saying about magnesium earlier, I feel like there's just like the mood boosting or just like the calming effects that it gives. So if you're maybe experiencing some of these things, again, another benefit of magnesium, like why wouldn't you just try that first?
yeah, well, because it's safe for most people unless you have really bad kidney function, because our kidneys mainly get rid of magnesium. It's tolerated very well, and it's just an essential mineral that most people
Yeah.
aren't getting enough of. So like, worst case you get some diarrhea, but best case it actually works really well.
Next question. This one actually comes from my husband. He is a marathon runner and he wants to know, what is your opinion on fueling for a marathon? Like, what would be your suggestions of things to eat? Kind of how would you best fuel somebody who is running a marathon?
Oh, that's a really good question. um, the most important thing would be hydration. Um,
Hmm.
Actually, you don't hydrate during a race; you hydrate before a race. So you would basically, the best thing to do for a marathon would be to consume a salt solution close to the saltiness of blood, which is about 32 to 3,500 milligrams of sodium per liter, and to consume about 1 to 1.5 liters of that fluid. So basically, taking like something like Relight and getting up to at least 3,000 milligrams of sodium in about 30 ounces of water, and you start consuming that about an hour and a half before the marathon. You consume it over 30 minutes slowly. So
Okay.
basically, so let's say you start an hour and a half, you consume it for 30 minutes. So now basically you have a full 60 minutes for it to get absorbed and to boost your blood volume. And now you're super hydrated and ready to go for that 4 hour marathon or however long it takes you to run that. And then obviously carbohydrate intake prior to the marathon is really important. So, if it was me, I would do probably, I would say, somewhere between 60 and 70 grams of carbs, maybe like an hour before, because you don't want salt and fluids and carbs sitting in the stomach while you're running. So you want to give yourself like that hour to like really digest it and absorb it and ready to be fueled. And then you will probably need to consume some of those glucose packets or whatever, depending on it depends on the person and how fast they're going, but maybe every 30 minutes or so.
Okay. I'm That's great. I'm sure he'll know exactly what you're talking about when I let him know that that was one of our questions. Well, I don't have any other questions for you. I feel like this has been super informative. We've learned a lot about some supplements, some vitamins that we should consider. I think this is giving our listeners a great starting point on how to like live a healthier version of themselves without making like a ton of life changing decisions. So I really appreciate you being on today. I do have one last question that I ask all of the guests that I interview. This one is, what is the most meaningful act of kindness that someone has extended to you that has had a lasting impact on your life?
It would have to be when my first child was born, my son. One of my coworkers gave me like a little baby gift basket for him. And, like, that just melted my heart. And the reason why it was so impactful for me is like how I was raised. Was just like, it, it just wasn't correct when it comes to like gift giving. It was like my parents were like, well, you know, when someone gives you a gift, like it shouldn't be about like materialistic things. And even Christmas was like, in my house, it was like, it shouldn't be about gifts. It should be about Christ being born, etc. And I almost had like this negative connotation of giving gifts to people like that, which was not right. And like that really opened my eyes. Like, wow, like just it's those small little acts of kindness. That's all you have in a day, and it adds up to a
Yeah.
lot. So like when you give someone a gift, it's not about the material thing. It's about how you're making that person feel, right? And so like even like so that from that moment on, I don't know why it just really hit me like that giving a gift can actually be very meaningful to someone.
Yeah, I love that. I am a huge gift giver. Even like my love language is receiving gifts. So I feel like that I can totally get on board with just, you can even just see like a person's whole demeanor just change when that like small act of kindness is given. Well, Dr. James, tell our listeners where they can find you.
So most active on Instagram, which is at Dr. James DiNic, but I also have a YouTube channel. You can just Google Dr. James DiNicolantonio YouTube. That's kind of more long form content, but some people, if you're looking for more long form videos, then you can go to my YouTube channel.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time today, Dr. James. Thank you again for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Brittany.